Powers, welcome. We're waiting for the cameras to show that the meeting is beginning. And, all right, we're back. Welcome, everybody. We have our next candidate, Mr. Joseph Powers. Welcome, Joe. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be here, and please, everyone can call me Joe. Thank you.
That's great. The format for today will be, we'll give you some time to make an opening statement, make some introductory comments about why you're interested in the position, and a little bit about yourself, and then we're just going to do round-robin questions, back and forth, and then you'll be given an opportunity to make some closing comments. That sound good?
Thank you. Sounds great.
Okay, yeah, we got to turn the mic on.
Despite my booming voice, thank you very much.
Now you're on. Now people can hear
Even better, I suppose, right?
Yes. Yes.
Well, again, thank you, and it is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here today. And for those that I haven't had a chance to, well, I have connected with everybody. And Mr. Chairman, I saw you as recently as the other day on our Zoom call for wastewater. So my name is Joe Powers, and I will first admit that I can never say hi in less than 20 words or less. So I will work on that. But I'm thrilled to be here because I see this opportunity as a wonderful opportunity. And I've mentioned to each of you that I can that I'm here because I always seek opportunities to challenge myself. And because in challenging myself, I grow, and growing is what I want to do as I work. I also seek this opportunity because I believe I can add value. And that's what I always look for in an opportunity and for a job. Is it something that I can challenge myself with and that will allow me to grow? And on the other side, for the employer, can I add value? And I believe the answer to those is an emphatic yes. I come to you today with extensive experience in municipal government. Been doing it since I was 19 years old. And I define it that way because I was first elected at 19 to representative town meeting. And that's something that sort of created, if you will, a love of municipal government and a respect for local government, especially towns that have town meeting and forms of government such as this. You'll see in my resume and my materials that I have a varied background, both in management and experience in government. I was telling some of your members earlier that I did not put on there my experience in the private sector as well. And I offer that as well because I think it gives me somewhat of an entrepreneurial mindset as we approach problems and opportunities to solve things for government. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you all for the chance to be here, and I look forward to getting into the discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, the first set of questions will be, or the first question will come from Selectman Dan Horgan.
I thought we were reversing.
Nope.
Okay. Again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
You've been a town administrator. I see you're currently at Harwich. Harwich. You've been with Wellfleet, certainly Braintree. Can you tell me, give me 3 examples of successes that you've had in each of those towns and failures, 3 failures that you've had? And I'm particularly interested in Harwich.
Thank you. It's a sign of the times, obviously, that my answer, I think, is going to be related to COVID-19 and where we find ourselves. But the first 3 successes that come to mind, especially with Harwich, come over the last year. When I was installed as, to be accurate, as the assistant town administrator at the time, when the town administrator left, it fell to me by charter and responsibility to assume the role of the administrator until such time as the board identified a permanent hire. And what I inherited was a very difficult budget situation. We were staring down a budget deficit of about $1.2 million. And this is before COVID. This is before things really got worse, if you will. And so I'm proud of the fact that I worked diligently with the finance director. Carol Capola is an exceptional person in every respect, and certainly as a finance director. In Harwich, it's a little bit different. The finance director reports directly to the board, so it had to be a collaborative relationship, and it was. And I told her my philosophy on the way I think we should approach it, and I sought her advice. And we were able to reduce that deficit and balance the budget by really having a very critical eye towards spending, obviously, expenses, and really just trying to prioritize as best we could. Well, the budget deficit and the great thing that we did never materialized because as we balanced the budget, we then came into COVID. And COVID impacted our budget to a greater degree, and I think that by the time we got to our annual town meeting in September of 2020, which is in no way any definition of an annual town meeting, the fall, outdoors, what have you, we had wrestled with an even bigger deficit, and we're able to pare that down and present a balanced budget. So the work that I was able to do immediately on the budget, I think, is something that I am proud of and look at as a success. As it relates to reacting to COVID-19, for the town of Harwich, March 13th, as we all know, is the date that I believe Governor Baker had made his announcement on March 10th, and many municipalities were now in a position of having to react. And March 13th was the day that I had to declare buildings closed. And I admitted then, and I'll admit it freely now, I don't know that I ever had the authority to do that, but it's what had to be done. And in concert with that, it struck me personally that I was very dismayed that by closing these buildings, we were denying access to government. And by closing these buildings, we were not affording ourselves the freedom of assembly. And so one of the first things I did is we settled on our application, if you will. You know, it's one of the things of COVID. Are you a Zoom? Are you a go-to-meeting? You know, what are you? And as soon as we were a go-to-meeting town, the first thing I did was established a citizens committee where it was a leadership meeting that every Friday for the first 10 weeks of the pandemic, I hosted certainly the chairman of the board and certain key government officials. We had representatives really from every walk of life, being the business community, the faith community, and many others, because we didn't have a place to meet. We didn't have a place to assemble. And so we used that every Friday as an opportunity to get information out to the public and to hear the concerns of the different groups. And so while we lost the freedom to assemble and the ability to assemble, we didn't lose a step in continuing the conversation and, more importantly, continuing the advocacy that needed to occur. And then the last success that I'm proud of is, as I mentioned, as a former moderator, springtime is town meeting. And we knew we wouldn't have an annual town meeting in May, and I wasn't really sure when we'd end up having it. So we ended up having our spring annual town meeting, which is usually a Monday night, indoors. We had it on a Saturday morning, the end of September, on a football field. And nothing about it felt like town meeting. But in the end, we passed our articles, we adopted our budget, and we had vigorous debate, which is the hallmark of town meeting. And the fact that nothing around the planning of that and nothing on the execution of that went wrong is something I'm proud of. But that pride is shared because I had so many great people partnering with me in the instance of balancing the budget, in the instance of communication, and in the instance of getting town meeting done. It was working with folks, directing folks, and being collaborative. The failures, I'm going to take a moment to try and think of them. Not that I don't have them, but I try to purge them. To me, my best failures are the ones that when I was able to stop either licking the wounds or salving my ego that may have been bruised, it was really what can I learn from it. And so for me, the failures that I look at over my career were results of probably putting my thoughts and my ideas above others, either being too unwilling or unmoving to move on. And so at this stage of my life, I try to reevaluate those and say, be mindful of others. Everybody has a role to play, and your way isn't always the best way. I apologize. I'm still failing to come up with specific examples, and I would say that I think the failures were a result of really me failing to communicate well, or me failing to consider the strategy of others. And it's something that I'm very mindful of to this day and try to avoid going forward.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. The next question will come from Selectman Tracy Post.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for being here and for your interest in our community. If you had to give a very brief SWOT analysis of Yarmouth, could you describe what that looks like?
Sure. And if I heard you, that was SWOT, right?
Correct.
Yep, so strengths, weaknesses. Well, for me, strength is you've got a well built out government, meaning you know who you are. You have a clear delineation with your selectmen. I think your charter and your governance documents support your form of government well. There's no ambiguity or opportunity to misunderstand. I think you have the benefit of a school, a regional school system that, although there's differences amongst towns, it's a mature system. You understand better than the younger systems, perhaps, such as what I'm faced with in Harwich. You have the benefit of all that being in place and understanding. I think you have a fairly diverse tax base compared to other places that I've worked. Certainly a heavy reliance on residential, but you've got a robust business community throughout Yarmouth, in my opinion. The opportunities I think of, the opportunities and threats I come back to what I mentioned earlier. We're all in wastewater together. When I say we, I mean Cape Cod, I mean Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, we all are in a need to do that. There's a wonderful opportunity, in my professional opinion, for three towns, Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth, to move forward on wastewater. But as was stated at a meeting recently, we're not there yet as three communities. And so that opportunity, if it becomes a threat, it's what would you have to do if it were just two communities? And then to me, generally, you always have the threat of what is COVID going to look like in 2021 as it manifests itself for revenue projections? If something else comes into play, whether it's a weather event, do you have the reserves and the financial wherewithal to be able to overcome that? And so, to me, very similar to the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities that I see in the town of Harwich, quite frankly. I hope I got to the essence of the question.
Other than the weakness.
Say again?
Other than the weakness.
Well, I guess the weakness I would say is, perhaps it's a weakness that there's a vacancy in administration, meaning this town has been very well served by some great people for long periods of time. And so I feel reluctant to offer that because I'm in a community that has had an interim administrator for well over a year. But the weakness is if you don't have strength in administration, then your strategies and your opportunities can go by the wayside. If you don't have strength in administration, that becomes its own threat.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. The next question will come from Mike Stone.
How you doing, Joe? It's good to see you again.
Likewise, Mike.
This isn't my question, but when you mentioned you're having a tough time identifying weaknesses, I remember once in a divorce case, I was representing a husband, and the judge said to him, well, is everything your wife's fault, or is any of this your fault? Do you have any weaknesses? And he thought for a minute, and he says, yeah. And the judge says, what is it? He says, I'm too modest. He didn't do well.
No doubt, no doubt.
I think his wife has got not only the house, but the boat. You talk about strength in management, and the specific question I have is, how do you manage, motivate, and ensure that the department heads working under you are fully accountable for the services delivered by their departments? And that's in the context of the various departments that you list in your resume that you're responsible for. I think 22 department heads and over 300 employees. So again, the question is, how do you manage, motivate, and ensure that department heads are fully accountable for the services delivered by their departments?
Manage, motivate, and what was the last one? Hold accountable?
Ensure
Ensure, yep.
that they are fully accountable. So you manage them. How do you manage them? How do you motivate them? And basically, how do you hold them accountable for the services they're supposed to be rendering?
Sure. First, to me, it helps to be on the same page with everybody as to what a department head is. And when I say that, I'm not speaking to you all. It's what the conversations I've had with department heads that have reported to me. And I've always made it clear that, in my opinion, a department head, first and foremost, is the subject matter expert in the area in which their department that they run. So if you're talking about a harbor master or community services or police, fire, whatever the case may be, those individuals are there because it's understood that they have an expertise specific to that mission and department. For me, how do I motivate and manage them and hold them accountable? It's providing the other things that you need from a department head, and that is the financial accountability and the personnel management. Now, to me, that's something that has to first emanate from administration and make sure that department heads feel supported, that they have the skills and the ability and the tools to manage their budgets, to manage their finances, and to be mindful of opportunities for grants and things just beyond the standard funding sources. And that they have the training and the support and the understanding of how to manage personnel. Because for a department head, it isn't simply being that subject matter expert. It's being the thing they're really good at, which is their subject, and then making sure they're supported with the everything else. And everything else to me is predominantly finance and personnel. So if we work from that understanding, how do I motivate them? I communicate well. I tell them what the mission is or the policy is that came from the board, and I make sure that I understand it as well as the board wants me to. And then I cascade that to them, and then I work with them to cascade it through to their staff. And so that's that downward communication and upward communication. But communication is critical in that motivation, in that managing, and in that accountability. And so it's keeping dialogue out there. One of the things that I detest about the environment in which we're in right now because of COVID is I don't get to manage the way I want to. And I love management by walking around. I love being out and about. I love seeing the folks that are really good at what they do, doing it in the environment that they do it in. And so, and I think that it can be a good thing when the boss shows up, if you will, when the boss is there to see what's going well and to support and to hear from folks. So I can't do it now, and that's frustrating. But to me, it's communicating, it's being seen, and then the last is just like we do in our lives. It's lead by example. You know, if I'm telling them that they got to hold the line on finances or they need to be more tied into performance reviews and have, honest to goodness reviews, then I've got to do the same thing. And so, leadership starts with the leader. And then leadership that gets transmitted out to the others makes everybody leaders. So to me, that's how I would do the motivation, the managing, and certainly the holding accountable.
Brief follow-up?
Yes, go right ahead.
Joe, once in a while situations come up where not everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. You may have a department head that is trying to carve out their own little place or fiefdom or whatever you want to call it. They're not getting that direct or not understanding or don't want to understand that downward channel of communication from the board through you to them. How do you rein in people that, and have you had any experience with that kind of deviation from the game plan, and how do you rein in or straighten those members of the team out?
So to the last part first, I have, and I do presently have one or two like that. And I heard it in my head, I'm still going to say it, but I hope it doesn't come across as harsh as it sounded. But you need to have a frank conversation and get them with the program, so to speak. Because the inherent problem with this, the scenario that you've outlined is that individual is focused on that individual or that individual's department. You know, my years in the business community, we always talked about enterprise-wide, organization-wide. And that's what a department is. A department is part of the overall organization. And so when there is a policy directive or when there's something that needs to be accomplished that comes from town meeting or the board or some other venue, then we need to be on board. And so how do I do it? I frankly and respectfully let them know that they're not with the program yet and they need to be with the program. And if it falls on deaf ears, then I have to rely upon my personnel management skills and document and do performance reviews. But within that is also an inherent understanding that there's going to be a discussion of why not? You know, I see it as though you're going this way. Do you see that you're going in a way that's in concert with the organization? If so, tell me how. And then work with that information to correct the behavior.
Thank you.
Very good. The next question, Eric Tolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How you doing, Joe? Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
This is kind of a two-part question. In your opening statement, you made a couple of references to your ability to add value. First of the two questions is, you know, what particular skill set do you possess that you believe would add value to our community? And second part is, what is that value and how would you quantify it?
Well, I think where I add value is, you know, I joke about not being able to say hi in less than 20 words, and that's because I have an exuberance, I think, and I like to talk, and I like to talk to people. But that's an offshoot of my dedication and my academic background in communication. You know, I talked earlier about upward and downward communication or horizontal communication, and that's all from the textbooks that I studied and later in life was able to teach others. It's trite, it's overused, but it's still true. Communication matters. And to me, always being mindful of message and receiver and the recipient and communication diffusion, the things that I know I said this, I don't know what you heard. You can say, well, I heard you say this. You know, there's always going to be, with the humans that we are, there's always going to be that disconnect. So communication's never perfect, but the problem is when communication breaks down, then there's the problem. So I always focus on what is the message, what needs to be conveyed. Now, in the role of administrator, I think I've said it today and I've said it before, that to me, it's very simple what an administrator needs to do. It's not easy, but it's very simple. An administrator serves to serve the board. The five of you sit in this public body at public meetings and debate the issues of the day. My job, before you get to that meeting with those issues, is to do everything I can to get as much information, not all the information, it's not possible, but to get as much information as I can to all of you so that as you're getting into those substantive discussions, you're making informed decisions. And to me, that's the critical aspect of it. So it's communicating with others to gather that information. It's having a clear message to present after the decision has been made.
Sorry.
Communication disconnect. There we go. But with that little break in the action, I hope I'm getting to what your question was, because as I heard it, so where do I add value? Communication's everything for me, and not just as a poster. I've studied it. I've studied it at grad school, and I've lived it in business and government. How you say something, how you deliver it, all of that's important and critical to the mission. The other thing I think I bring to add value is, for better for worse, I think I said it to Tracy earlier, that you know, I used to be a selectman. It's a condition I hope I never have again. But what I learned from that is I have, I think, a better sense than most because I've served. I've been on the other side of the plexiglass. I've been on the other side of the microphone. I know what you go through. And so an administrator that can recognize that when you put your name on a ballot and a bumper sticker, you're putting yourself out there completely, and it's not easy to do that. So you should be able to rely upon somebody who understands what you're going through, because I've gone through it, and can put ego aside and say, it's not about me, it's about me serving the board, and by extension, the town.
Well, I'll say thank you, and I will say the most important thing I took from that is the quote that I know what I said, but I don't know what you heard, and I'm going to have that embroidered on a throw pillow at my house. Thank you.
You.
Joe, welcome again. My question centers around municipal finance. Yarmouth has been gone through some difficult financial times, and in recent years, we've become in a much stronger position. Back in 2011, the town did a comprehensive financial management review that sort of laid out the blueprint for a lot of the work that we've done and helped sort of get us to the point that we're at today. Have you been involved in any financial management reviews? Would you be supportive of Yarmouth doing this again? And I'm just curious about your views or thoughts about this particular topic, because this is something that we're talking about right now, and it'll be sort of front and center on the agenda, and I'd be interested in hearing a little bit of your thoughts about this.
Certainly. First, I admit to everybody that I'm a word person, and so the thing that I've never taken pride in is my mathematical abilities. Having said that, I worked on Wall Street, and I wrote documents for public companies and for shareholders, regulators, and investors. What I do when it comes to finances, I rely upon the people that have that know what they're talking about. We have a commonality. I think it's fair to say I know firsthand for Harwich, and I've heard from a number of people over a number of years that Yarmouth is equally well served by your finance director. And so what I do is I rely upon the experts. But just like when I was in banking and I wasn't a banker, I rely upon my skill sets that I bring to the table. And that is, while I may not be a CPA mind, I have a strategic mind. And I have a way to take those numbers that can be very daunting, because they were daunting to me, and turn them into messages and turn them into things that everybody can understand. And so when you ask the question, would I support comprehensive financial review, I have no choice but to say yes, because that comprehensive financial review is going to get everybody to the same set of facts, not to the same opinions, but to the same set of facts. And those facts are going to weigh heavy on the decisions that will be made going forward from there. And a comprehensive financial review, in my opinion, gives the other side of the equation of government that I haven't talked about yet, but town meeting. Finances matter to a Board of Selectmen. Finances matter to a town meeting, because finances is taxes, finances is residents and real people. And so to make sure that you've done that deep dive into your finances is absolutely critical. And the auditors love it, and I know Wall Street loves it when you go for your bond ratings and all of that. It's absolutely essential that as you're getting into public policy and personnel and anything else, that you have a complete and full understanding of where you are, what pitfalls lie ahead, and what resources you have and don't have. And so for me, as a non-financial person who's been in a lot of finance-related roles, that exercise is absolutely critical. And then what you do with it becomes the next criticality.
Mm-hmm. My follow-up is, I'd be very interested in reviewing any of the S&P or Moody's ratings and reports on the communities that you've worked in. I'm asking this of all the candidates. I'm very interested in looking at how the bond rating agencies are evaluating the management of the communities that each of the candidates has sort of worked in, so I can kind of get an outside independent assessment. So for Harwich, I'd be very interested, as well as I know you were a selectman for quite a while in Braintree. That kind of information would be helpful. I'm certainly going to share it with the rest of the board. So if you could provide that information, I would very much appreciate it. I could go on, but I'm going to save the rest of my questions until to future rounds. I'm going to go back now over to Dan Horgan and give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with school systems? We have a regional school system here. Do you have experience? What is your experience with regional school systems? And particularly, how do you approach the relationship in terms of finances, trying to provide a good quality education and at the same time working from the same pot of money to provide town services that are necessary versus the tax rate?
So first, to describe my experience, I thought I had exceptional experience when it came to regional school systems for all the years that I was off Cape, because my hometown was, I believe, one of 15 member communities in the regional school system there. And then I came to Cape Cod and realized that was nothing like what happens here and what is in place. And so when I first came to Cape Cod and was related to the Nauset school system, it was completely foreign to me. And not having that base of knowledge really forced me and caused me to do a significant amount of research to really get myself an understanding of how it operates. Because for me, that's the way it's being operated. It's not me coming in and saying, no, this is what I'm used to, let's change it to that. And that helped me when I was in Wellfleet, when I get into Harwich. And it's what I was referencing earlier, where you folks have a two-town regional school system, but it's more mature. You've already gone through a lot of what I see that we're now going through immediately in Harwich and Chatham. You know, we've been a school system for, I believe, a regional school system for 9 years now. And because of the pandemic and because of population, demographics, and a dearth of school children, we're really now starting to feel that pressure. And so for me, understanding that, regional wasn't this 15-member behemoth where you could, even though we were a bigger town, you could sort of hide behind it. I'm now very familiar with two individual towns, neighbors, directly, with a lot of shared experiences, a lot of shared history. But now, when the tough times come, you realize that you're two separate towns. And so what I'm realizing, I should say, is I think I'm fortunate in Harwich that with the Monomoy system, my peer in Chatham is someone that I've known for a few years now, but had known by reputation. And so whatever differences our towns may have, I know that Jill and I have a solid enough professional relationship that we can deal with the differences. And that's critical right now, because as it goes from my counterpart in Chatham and I to the boards, there's also the regional school committee. And so to me, it's critical to make sure you've got strength of relationships, so that as we get into the difficulties, and what I'm talking about specifically for Monomoy is the growing chasm in the percentage split, if you will. And I've heard from folks, I've only lived in town for 6 years. My kids are in the system, but really wasn't familiar with it before then. And I've heard people say, we were worried about this when we started the system, but we didn't think it was going to come this soon. And so when you're talking about a 75-25 split, that's growing and growing, and that's putting pressure on my town. It's easy for me to suggest that, well, they need to step up. But it's not that easy, because they and Chatham have their own issues to deal with and their own expectations. So when I first came here, I thought I knew regional school systems. Having lived and worked here for the last 6 years, I've developed a much better appreciation, certainly for the two-member towns. And the last few months or in past year, with all the financial difficulties, I'm keenly aware of the things that can sort of split a district. And so, to me, how do you ensure the quality of education? First of all, is you remain committed to the goal of the system, and then that's to educate every child in both towns. How do you maintain that relationship when there's that dichotomy in finances? you have the difficult discussions and the tough meetings that we're having. And then you just rely upon the relationships that you have and the relationships that you've built to hopefully have a positive conclusion in the end.
Mr. Chairman, can I have
Yes.
just a quick follow-up?
Go right ahead.
What kind of relationship would you hope to create with the superintendent of schools of a regional system?
Well, I think, first, it's purely professional in the sense of I would want that individual, and I'll be quite honest with you, I've done no research on the school system. I don't know the gender or anything about the superintendent. But to me, it's going to be first a getting to know you. I have no doubt that that individual, being in that position, is qualified to be there and has exceptional educational credentials. And I want them to take comfort in me as the administrator, if I am, that they can rely upon the skill sets that I bring to the table as a government person, as somebody who has a strength of experience with getting budgets passed through town meeting, which to me is the ultimate conclusion for everything. And just start from there, just a basis of respect for each of the roles that we have and what we bring to those roles, and then ensuring that we're able to communicate and continue to discuss. There are going to be disagreements. To me, it's inherent. I can use all the analogies that come with two entities, two people, two schools, two towns, and a school system. So there's always going to be those pressures. But as with anything in life, if you approach it with respect, a sense of mutuality, and communication, you'll end up achieving things even through difficult times.
Very good, thank you. Tracy Post.
Thank you. My next question was about communication style, but you've spoke quite a bit about your style with the cascading of information. Can you talk to us a little bit about your management style and how you engage staff to accomplish goals?
I fear I'm going to be repetitive and redundant, as the joke goes, insofar as very similar to the way I just ended my answer to Selectman Horgan's question. You start out with respect and understanding. My management style is if I'm in a management role, it's because somebody or some people have believed that I'm the right person to be in that place, and I take that knowledge as strength and stability, and gives me a comfort in myself and my role. And then as I know the folks that I'm dealing with, try to get to know them on a personal level, insofar as the person in the profession. My management style, as I've said before to Selectman Stone's question, is generally speaking for management department heads, they're subject matter experts. They're the people that know what their departments are doing, and understand that and respect that. In the situations, and so for that, I try to give them. I don't think free reign is the exact quote. I don't want people to think that they can just it's a laissez-faire, do what you want. But if I feel comfortable that we've communicated well and they understand the mission, and I know that they know their particular strengths, and I'm supporting them with any other areas, then we're going to get along great. I like periodic check-ins. Again, COVID is wreaking havoc with the way that I like to operate. I like to be around people. I like people to be around me. Let's have regular check-in, weekly check-ins, if you will, but not as an individual, for groups. What's happening in the community services group? How are you all tying together? What do you need? What are the pitfalls that are coming up? So for me, it's recognizing, my management style is recognizing that you've got the right people in the right place. When you come across one that isn't the right person, you use all the skills and requirements you have to either make them the right person or help them become the right person, or you find a way to eventually cut ties and get the right person in there. Management style is let them do. Have them understand that they can reach out, that they can ask questions, that they can seek support, and be there to listen, and then communicate with them, communicate back to the board for them, and really just make sure everything's humming.
Okay. You talked, just to follow up to that, because you talked a lot about your communication within staff. How do you communicate with the public? Do you have a plan or basically a philosophy.
I can't remember which of you had asked before about what I thought of the public, and I said, I know it's cheesy, but I love the public, meaning that's what municipal government is. It's people. That's what public administration's all about, and that's what public service is. As I tell my kids, I don't always like persons, but people to me are that collection of individuals, and this is why we're doing the job. When I talk about my experience and starting out 30-something years ago in town meeting, for me as an administrator to work for the executive branch to support a successful endeavor at town meeting, that's all built on town meeting as people. It's residents, it's taxpayers, it's business owners, and it's always being mindful of what we're doing this all for. And so during COVID, I don't get to do any of the things that I like to do. I know I'm complaining more than I should, but I love to be out in the community. Whatever community I'm in, I support it. I go to those businesses. I probably go to too many restaurants than I should, but I try to be out there and give back to the community. And then when you're out there, you can hear from them. And they're going to complain to you, but they're going to give you some good insights. And so I miss the interaction right now. This plexiglass is necessary but unnatural. I miss having people be able to come in. I miss seeing people at ball games. And so that's what I do. I talked earlier about management by walking around. That's part of how I interact with the public. There's a benefit to living and working in the same town. The downside, as you all know as well as I do, when you go to the bank or the grocery store, whether your kids want to talk to that person or not, they can reach you. But that's a little price to pay for the overall benefit that comes from all that. I hope I've gotten to the...
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. The next question, Mike Stone.
Joe, I'm going to ask you a little bit about wastewater, but I'm not talking about specific Harwich's involvement or non-involvement in a regional project. I want you to assume for purposes of this question that you're a Yarmouth employee. Environmental values are strong in this community, and wastewater, runoff management, water issues generally are coming to the forefront in our community and on the Cape generally. It's an issue that's going to require ongoing attention. It's complex, expensive, and politically sensitive. What in your background equips you to address this issue in the Yarmouth context and more generally to sustain Yarmouth's environmental values?
So, for clarification, when you say environmental, are you saying the potential downsides that come with sewering versus, say, other solutions that may be available?
Sure, I'm talking, yes, just generally, yes.
Well, first to go back in time when I was off Cape and I came here and I heard about sewering, when I bought my house, I neglected to ask if it was sewer or septic. Mercifully, the agent told me up front. I had zero experience whatsoever with septic. What I had experience off Cape was with a century-old tri-town sewer system. I still struggle to call it wastewater. We always knew it as water and sewer. So I had the perspective of somebody that had the benefit of the pipes were already in the ground, the work was already done, so we didn't talk about environmental. It was done. And then when I got to Wellfleet, and even though I was just the town clerk, they were dealing with the wastewater as everybody on Cape Cod has been. And in Wellfleet, there was more discussion about environmental rather than going with sewer. And I learned quite a bit about some of the alternative solutions that may be available. But I also learned that as you go from a more rural environment in Wellfleet and the Outer Cape, and you come into a more densely populated and more robust community, sewering is going to have its place. Now, I'm exceedingly fortunate to be in a town that has an exceptional water, wastewater superintendent. He is as into wastewater and water as I am into municipal government, and he energizes me. And he's a person that is always looking for the alternative for the benefit of the environment. And so for me, I couldn't get into specifics. In fact, I'm constantly reminded by my team that when we met as a group back in February, I think I told you all, and I still say it, I don't know what I&I is versus alternative this or that, but I know the people who talk about it. And so it's absolutely proper and right to focus on the ecosystem and environment that we have on Cape Cod. It's what makes Cape Cod as beautiful as it is. I have a pond in my backyard. I didn't have that off Cape, you know. And so to be mindful of these very intrusive projects that are going to disrupt Earth and people and try to balance that with the environmental concern has to be there and will always be a part of the equation. Obviously, I think you know there's a however or a but coming up. However, we have to meet the dictates of the 208 of EPA. We have to do what's going to be considered to be in compliance. And so I know that there are other communities that are searching for the alternative technologies, and I would be fascinated to see how well they progress, to see if that can work in Yarmouth. But first, we have to make sure that as we're doing these projects, we're meeting what needs to be done from a regulatory standpoint, while always being mindful to protect the surrounding environment. Cost is always going to be a factor that's going to impact upon that. It's not earth-shattering or new news for me to say that the things that you want to do tend to be more expensive than the way that you do things. And so, to me, it's going to have to be a balance. You're going to have to always avail yourselves of any of the expert voices that are out there, not just the folks that know sewer systems, but folks that have an expertise in alternative solutions. But right now in Harwich, we have that struggle with folks wanting us to pursue more alternative options. And that may be a luxury that we may not be able to pursue. And so we're still going to talk about it, we're still going to evaluate it, but everything has to be predicated on the project needs to be done to satisfy the regulatory requirements.
Okay, very good, thank you.
You have emphasized it not only educationally, but by your own self-evaluation, that your skills are in communication. And along those lines, these regional projects are not a given. There are financial considerations. There are people that say in the north side, for example, we don't need sewers there. Why should we buy into this project? So assuming that the Board of Selectmen favors these types of regional projects, which Yarmouth has already voted to do, how do you use those skills that you have as a communicator to foster a community buy-in for these kinds of projects?
Well, I said before about how there are things that are simple but not easy, and this clearly falls into that category, because for me, when you ask how would I foster that and encourage that and move it forward, to me it's predicated on for me right now, the assumption, but doing it in real life, the knowledge that there has been robust discussions amongst the Board of Selectmen and through town meeting and community input, and that led to a decision that was made. It's simple for me to carry that decision forward because it was born out of deliberation, discussion, argument, and it led to a conclusion that, in this instance, this public body made. So then when you go out to the public and it's simple for me. It's not going to be me saying, I didn't do this. That was the board. It's simple for me to say, well, as you recall, we had those community forums in the 3 different towns, and we've had the outreach efforts. And so communicating that is predicated on the governance that occurred before, and then the pushback is going to be defended by the governance that's going to happen going forward. These are not moment in time solidified decisions that will never change in any way, shape, or form, even those things that have already been committed to. This is an ongoing dynamic. This is an ongoing project or discussion that's always going to have the need for a matter to come before a public body, for the public to weigh in on it, but it will always end in a conclusion, and we move that conclusion forward. So relying upon the governance that will have occurred to reach out to the community to get them, not to get them to understand, to offer information to help them see where we were coming from, and then continuing the governance discussion forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you. The next question, Eric Tolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Powers, we here in Yarmouth are very fortunate in that we have dozens, if not hundreds, of hardworking volunteers that sit on a variety of boards, committees, commissions, several of which are involved in the development of our annual budget. Describe to me your budgeting process and how you work to bring all of the relevant players, whether it be department heads or volunteer committees, together to help develop your annual budget.
Well, for me presently, the mechanism has been that within weeks, if not maybe a month or two, following town meeting in the spring, the board starts discussing the budget for the next year. And the board has public meetings where they're developing their budget message. So for me, and again, going back to that simple and easy, while we were able to accomplish some great things with our budget last year, it was simple for me, and I was a little bit surprised at the reaction of the board and the town, because I followed the message that was created. And that message was created out of several meetings of back and forth with the board and refining the language. But once we had that document, that gave me everything I needed to push the process forward. And that's relevant now because the board, because we had success following the budget message and sticking with what was outlined and allowing us to go through the difficulty and cutting budgets but balancing the budget, the board now is looking at a different mechanism. They're looking at level funding. And in that scenario, what I was able to do is go back to the board and say, if I've heard you correctly, this is level funding and working off of Department of Revenue definitions, meaning this isn't something that I made up. This isn't something that they made up. It's based on something that can be quantified elsewhere through the Department of Revenue. We had a definition and a knowledge of what level funding means. The net effect of that is there's a lot of pressure on the operating budget right now. It's caused departments to have their budgets be reduced lower than zero to the negative. But every step of the way, I've reminded everybody that the level funding that we're going through, here's the definition of it through Department of Revenue. And in that definition, it talks about it causes a reduction because you have to hold your fixed costs separate. We have a budget message that was developed, in this case in September. To me, it's a very clear message. I've conveyed that and carried that forward. As department heads have pushed back on that, I've indicated to them that I understand, and I truly do. As a person, a former department head, and other towns having to do that, I understand exactly where they're coming from. But the mission right now of the organization has been set. It was based on significant deliberation with a very specific outcome. And so I rely upon that, but also reminding everybody of the process. The selectmen came up with the budget message. I redefined it. I offered clarification by offering definitions, not that I redefined. And now as I go through that process, I've reminded everybody I have a charter responsibility on February 8th to present to the selectmen a balanced budget, a comprehensive balanced budget. And I'm doing that in accordance with the budget message. Now, that February 8th is 3 months before town meeting. So I know the next part of that process is the board's now going to hear directly from Finance Committee, Capital Outlay Committee, department heads, and residents. And they're going to make decisions. They may draw a line in the sand, if you will, and say, in this instance, we're continuing with the message, or they're going to be informed by what they're hearing, and we're going to have more information because we know it's always changing, and we're going to make further decisions. But through it all, it was predicated on a message that was born out of the executive branch that's being conveyed to everybody, department heads, committees, what have you, and I have been consistent. Not consistent with what they want to hear, but consistent in saying, this is the process. And so for me, it's cold comfort to the folks that don't get paid to do this. These are the folks that volunteer their time, the hundreds that you've talked about, literally the backbone of the government, and you're saying no. But for me, it's simple because it's based on that what was vetted, that what was deliberated, and that what was presented.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
So
yes,
you
go ahead.
said throughout it all, you remain consistent, not necessarily consistent with what they want to hear. They being who?
Department heads, advocates, folks that don't want to do that level of fun. They really need to do this for their program or their mission.
So we have something similar here. I think it's called our budget
A
policy
statement, yeah.
statement. So those are your marching orders.
Correct.
And absent, you develop your budget based on that. We have a similar process here where capital budget, finance, maybe a handful of other committees, department heads come in, and we listen to their needs. I don't know that it makes a tremendous influence on us, but because by then the budget is fairly well developed. But I just want to make sure that I understood you, that the budget policy statement that is your marching order, and then it's up to the selectmen to stray from that, should they so choose to, based on strong arguments from department heads.
Yes, however,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yeah.
I did a 1-month check-in this past week to the board because the messages I was getting from department heads and committees is that this is a very difficult budget. And so I presented to the board a preliminary draft, not to take the pressure off me, but to give comfort to those that before we got into that almost cement-like stage, that there was me presenting to the selectmen, I want you to be aware of everything that I'm doing. Because the other part of it that I validated or will seek validation on is the level of funding was absolutely abundantly clear to me, and as you say, it's the marching orders. Within that message, they talked about to not rely upon debt exclusions. So in my capital budget right now, there are 4 items that require debt exclusions. So I've said to the board that I will seek clarification. When you say to not rely heavily on debt exclusions, what's the number? But again, with an eye towards, on February 8th, I have an obligation, a legal obligation, to present a comprehensive budget, and it is balanced. And from that, I then get to work with the board to continue to inform them so that they can make those informed decisions. So I didn't want you to think that it was just, these are the marching orders and I haven't strayed. Given the amount of feedback I was getting, I thought it was appropriate to do a point-in-time presentation and then sort of just alert everybody because it's a difficult budget and I have more to cut before I get to the 8th.
I think we do something similar. Often the first go-around is a little gloomy, and then we say fix it, and it gets fixed.
It's always balanced, no doubt about
Do you
it.
have a follow-up,
Yeah,
Tracy?
just as a follow-up of that, our process is similar, and as we all know, as things move along, things change. We prepare our budget before the state does. We even heard information tonight about our projections and with health insurance, and so
Right.
as those things come, I think we've been regularly updated. However, I find like the one piece that's always interesting, to your point, about dealing with all the volunteer committees and listening to all the department heads, is in this difficult time, you're cutting things that are extremely important. I guess I'd be interested in hearing how you would handle that information. So if you were to say to the police department, for instance, that you have to level fund, and that means that this program or this service that's you feel is extremely important is on the chopping block. How would you handle that?
For me, I really base it on, and I made references earlier to my personal views on government, if you will, and it's all about town meeting. What I'm motivated by is if I'm doing as directed with an eye towards a balanced budget, and I know that it's going to impact upon people and programs and critical things, that's all tough and that's all difficult to deal with. But for me, the unforgivable action in municipal government is having a budget voted down at town meeting. And so if I come up with those conversations, and I've had similar ones presently, where if this budget progresses to the way I see it going, we're going to have significant program reductions. And that can manifest itself in a bad way for personnel. And that will manifest itself poorly in the community, that we're not able to do what they want us to do. But the community is also town meeting. And town meeting is the other part of the equation that, and what I don't like about that equation is we meet in May, and as you've said correctly so, appropriately so, the state's still doing their stuff. July 1 comes. And aside from a pandemic, you don't get those extensions for the most part. If you present a budget that's just not going to pass muster in May, you are scrambling to get something done before by July 1. And so for me, if the police chief is saying, I know what the message is, but this is going to take police officers off the street, my response is, I've heard you, and I'm going to include that in my narrative. But I'm going to keep pushing to that dollar amount, because what happens if I say you're right and keep those officers on the street or keep that community policing program going, and then something else happens or town meeting says enough. The taxes are too much. What's going on in the rest of the world, in the state economy and the global economy, and for me personally in my home. It's that classic battle between what we want to offer the community versus what can they afford.
Yeah, I guess my question more is about kind of pivoting.
Okay.
In meaning, sometimes we sit here and we set budget policies, which are difficult things to do. However, we don't have all the information you have in terms of what impacts it could really have. And so sometimes we need to be aware of that and pivot from our decision if it's something. So I guess my question more was like, when you see that in the board going in a direction that you don't feel is in the best direction of the community, how would you handle that?
Thank you.
Instead of just, I guess I'm looking at, this and that's the way it is. And I would hate for us to be so formal that we move forward with that, not seeing the big picture. And I would hope that perhaps, there'd be some communication with you and the board that would say, I've met your directive, I see your letter, I'm having a balanced budget, but you should be aware that this is the repercussions for those decisions.
First of all, thank you for the chance to answer the question a second time, because I missed the mark on that one.
Well, it was probably my questioning, I'm sorry.
No, and thank you for the clarification, because, there's so much in my mind. The reference I made earlier, that 1 month peek in that I just did, that was because I was hearing and seeing that, okay, yep, we know what level funding is, we know fixed costs, all this other stuff. It's really starting to look bad, gloomy and ugly is the way to say. So in that particular instance, I availed myself of the public meeting and public documents to get it out to everybody, but directly through to the board, to say that, because there is no formal requirement to do that 1 month check-in, if you will. And I just felt that it was the right thing to do because of what I was hearing, because the budgets were in, and they had the conversations with me, and I saw the whole picture and couldn't give in, so to speak. So because of that, I thought it important for me to go on TV and to the board in public to say, we're in trouble. We've got a difficult budget. We're hoping, and we talked about the health care, we're hoping some of these other things come in and it reduces it. But I don't see anything right now, barring any major positive money falling from the sky. There it is. I still see a deficit. And because it's level funding, the additional deficit is going to impact upon people and programs. So in real time, I availed myself of the public meeting and public documents. And for me, that was important because with such a message like that, I wanted to get it out as quickly as I could. But I also didn't, in my opinion, put the board in a difficult position. It was put on their agenda as a discussion point only. I made it clear I wasn't looking for them to react because that would be blatantly unfair of me. But it was more of a, I will continue to have these conversations leading up to the 8th because we're really now starting to hit bone. And so that's how I do it. And then generally, if I come across something that I think the board needs to know, I use the mechanism of the email with the blind copy so that they can't reply all and be accused of serial deliberation. But I communicate as much as I can. And I try to do everything in writing and what I call narratives because it exists. And if I wrote it and it's out there, I can't denounce it and I can't say I didn't say it. And so it's a song sheet that they can refer to going forward. I hope I've better answered the question this time. Thank you.
Good, that's that. Thank you. I'm going to forego my question this round. I'm going to go back to Dan Horgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Economic development is a key priority in this town. We obviously are really staggered by the effects that COVID has had. And the tax revenues over the last 10 years from our commercial base has dropped 50%. How would you go about trying to increase economic development in our town? Do you recognize any trends that are developing for certain business opportunities that we could go to attract? And how would you go about doing that?
I'll freely admit that I haven't been able to bring my mind to that, specifically meaning once we get out of COVID, what could we do to rebuild or pick up where we left off? And the reason I say that is I've seen firsthand the decimation that the pandemic is causing on businesses. I have a direct role in the licensing process. And so as we went through the annual renewal process, we've had a number of establishments reach out, and we've got that regulation, as everyone does, that says if you're going to close down for a longer period of time, you've got to let us know. And we got relief from the ABCC, but the number of establishments that have been stalwarts in the community and just survived everything are in terrible, terrible positions now. And so I'm very concerned presently, and I'm concerned about the next 3 or 4 months. But to try to turn this into a positive, I look back on what we were able to do in the town of Harwich when it came time to open up again, as we were told, if you will, open the economy and allow for outdoor seating. I worked with all my regulatory officials, worked with the licensing team and administration, and sought the direction from the board, and they were fantastic. They were unequivocal, they were clear, and they said we're going to do whatever we can to support business. And so the first day that outdoor seating was available, we have 16 establishments that were eligible for it. I believe by the end of that day we had 13 that had outdoor seating that day. And so what I take from that is government can tend to be regulatory and adjudicatory and, the bad guy, if you will. But what we learned this past summer and what we have to be mindful of this spring and summer in the future is that we need to support the business community. We need to be mindful of economic development, and we need to partner better. We didn't relax any of our regulatory requirements. We sped up the process. We did everything that we could to have them go through the proper paces to make sure it was going to be safe, it was going to be proper, but we did it in lightning speed because we didn't want to be the reasons why the business failed. And we wanted to give them everything that they could. So I've got a mental block looking past, and in my mind, it's June. I don't know why June's in there. I don't know if that's related to the vaccine or whatever, but whatever we can do in economic development. I mean, I'm very fortunate. We have a wonderful Chamber of Commerce director and program and robust community. I would rely upon that. I think really what I would do first and foremost is ask them what they need and to see if we can provide it, or to ask them if there's something that we're doing that prevents them. Can we relax that? Government needs to support business because business always supports government. And I know that just sounded like a campaign promise, but you really have to re-examine the role of how you operate in the short term.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. The next question, actually, you had your follow-up, but I'm going to come back to Tracy Post for the next question.
Thank you. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look at Yarmouth's governmental structure. I don't know if it's got similarities to Harwich. So my question would be really, if you've had the opportunity, what your thoughts are, if there's any thoughts about, what you might want to see or do differently as a leader. And the second part of that is, if you had the opportunity to have this position and you were appointed, what would your top priority be?
So first to your governance, I will freely admit that I read town charters. I know what that says about me as a party animal, but governance documents, as I said to Dan, as a former moderator, those are the things that matter. So I've read your charter, and I think you have a very, like I said before, a very well-defined structure. And I think when you have the right person in it, it works well. And to me, I'm loath to change charters anyway. They're meant to be a solid framework. And I didn't really dive into your bylaws and regulations that build off of the charter. But from my vantage point, you have a very well-defined position in town administrator. You've got an exceptional job description that has clarity. So for me, it's one of the reasons why I'm here today, because you have that strength of governance and you have that strength of clarity in the position. With regard to what would I do first, I would, however I can do it safely, get out in front of as many stakeholders as possible. And that obviously would be walking around this building and any other public building, getting out into the community and introducing myself, because I'm not coming into a town that by any stretch needs to be overhauled. I believe I'd be coming into a town that had maybe a different vision, had a person with a different vision or a different skill set for administration, but you'd be bringing in somebody that understands the form of government you have, the processes that need to play through, and I'll repeat myself yet again, and get through a successful town meeting. And so the first thing I'd want to do is make sure I could get in front of as many people as I can, because I'm going to have to rely upon them. I know government, I don't know Yarmouth. I need those people to tell me what Yarmouth is, what the culture is, what the pitfalls are, and what the opportunities are.
Thank you.
Good. Next question, Mike Stone.
I guess somewhat of a follow-up question to that. It's not a follow-up, but a similar question. But before I say that, I want to thank you for a takeaway from this interview where you said that you like people, but you don't always like persons. I think I can use that very effectively in my response to some of the members of the public.
I hope it didn't come across as fresh. but-
It's just like I've always said about kids. I love children. I just don't like them when they grow up and become adults. But the question I have is, what do you see as the top challenges, some of the top challenges you think are going to face municipal officials, particularly in this locality on the Cape within the next 5 years or so? And what do you think you can do to effectively prepare Yarmouth to face those challenges?
I hope it's not too dour to start out by referencing the pandemic. In my mind's eye, I see this tsunami that hit, this wave. And we know with tsunamis that when it ebbs and it retreats, what you're left with is debris and devastation. I don't think we're really going to know what the world, if you will, is going to look like once the pandemic is under control. In Harwich, we were saved by people that, I would suspect it was probably true to some degree here. We were saved by people that fled. And, we can all talk about what it did to the grocery store and people not wearing the masks, but they fled, they came over the bridge, and they golfed. And they ate and drank, and they rented. And so we were amazed to see over the summer that, we were doing better in that area of revenue than we ever expected. And, and I saw it with the building department, with not only the building permits themselves, but the renovations. And so I was telling my team that what I saw was people went to their nests and they've rebuilt them, or they're building them bigger. So what happens in 2 years when the allure of the Cape and being able to spread out is, well, it's great in the summertime or the shoulder season, but I got to get back to city life. What happens if we have that retreat? Are we going to see vacancies and a dearth, just the opposite, a glut in the housing market, meaning not affordable housing, but all these people that bought their houses and built them up and increased the property values, and now 2 years later it's better to live in a more urban setting. I don't know what that's going to be, and we don't know what the end result is. We also don't know what's going to come out of the longer-term health consequences, and so that's what concerns me. Now, as much as I can say I don't know that, in July of 2019, I didn't know anything about tornadoes. But I'll tell you, when one hits, you educate yourself pretty quickly. And so all these things that I just mentioned that I'm afraid of, it's because I don't know. But what I do know is in my town, and I'm sure here and just about everywhere, that when something bad hits and you're blessed to be able to pick yourself up the ground, shake the dust off and say, I'm okay, then you say, okay, what do we got to do? And we're going to do it. We did that after the tornado hit. We've been doing it every day that the pandemic hit. So while I fear what I don't know is going to come out of this, I am buoyed by the fact that whatever it is, it's something that we're going to be able to respond to. And more often than not, we're probably going to be better off in the long term than we were before it hit. And it's that optimism that keeps me going.
Do you see any other challenges on the forefront other than COVID in the near to intermediate term?
Well, I see the regular challenges coming back, if you will. COVID has caused us to have a laser focus on the pandemic, on health issues. We still have to provide affordable housing. We have to provide workforce housing. We have school systems that are running out of kids. And so the issues that we had before a pandemic hit are still going to be our issues. They're going to be exacerbated by the time that we couldn't spend on it because of the pandemic, and they're going to be exacerbated by any other influences that exist in the future. And so we're going to have to go back to our core mission, and we're going to have to probably do more than we even thought we had to do before. And all of that with limited budgets and limited finances.
Thank you.
Good. Eric Tolley.
Again, this is my second bite at the apple. I have a question, but in the interest of time, if Selectman Post or you or Selectman Horgan have a question, I will concede my time.
Oh, go right ahead, Eric.
Okay. Joe, you made a reference in an earlier answer to your relationship with the Chamber of Commerce. You know, Yarmouth does not have a large business community, but the leaders in the small business community are strong and influential, but silent. You know, they kind of work through the chamber and our community development department. I know the chamber would like to be more engaged with the town. Can you describe to me your experience with other chambers of commerce and how you kind of bring them into the mix and make them feel like they are involved with the ongoings of the town? Because I do think that it's an important part of our economy here, and you know, we rely on them to promote the town.
Well, first, I want to temper my answer with what I'm about to say is not the belief that I would be the fifth Beatle or the sixth selectman, meaning there's no greater resource for businesses than the five of you as selectmen. But as your emissary, if you will, and as your day-to-day person, I should be the one going out to those small businesses to let them know that government's here, and whether they've reached out or not, we're reaching out because they are vital. And you know, it's not as simple to say, well, we're government, we're always open, come in anytime. No, these are folks that are working diligently to operate a business in very difficult times. And so for me to get out into that community and reach out to the businesses to say, hey, I'd like to get a round table together and, you know, work amongst yourselves as to who it would be, but I'd like to see folks from the different sectors. I'd like to see finance and real estate and faith-based and all of that, like I did in Harwich, because if you reach out to them, the ones that I have the time will certainly step up. And then you can start talking. And then I can, for lack of a better word, explain government, because there's nothing more unnatural than government, especially when it comes to business. And so, you know, let them know that there are going to be things that we can't do or we can't operate as quickly as businesses can. But if you reach out and they know that there's someone they can talk to, I think that really starts the beginning of a beautiful relationship, as the movies tell us. And I say that because it's well established in Harwich, so it was easy for me to go down to Harwichport and knock on Cindy's door and say, how's it going? You know, what does your group need? And Cindy's a great advocate that if I didn't go and knock on her door, she'd come and knock on mine. So it's good for government to get out there and let them know, let folks know that we come in peace and we come to support them.
Cindy, I assume, is the Chamber of Commerce?
Sorry, yes, that's
Okay.
our executive director.
Okay.
Yep.
Good, thank you.
Dan Horgan.
Just quickly, how does technology, if at all, play into your ability to move forward with managing the town and communicating effectively with not only the board but with public?
I am, well, first I'm a gadget guy with my Apple Watch and my iPod and all that other stuff. I love the technology that's available. I love the technology that we can bring into government. Having said that, I come from a town and a town before that couldn't or didn't invest in that. And so I went to a presentation, I believe, about 4 years ago up at the county, and these folks from Yarmouth were showing off. I think it was OpenGov or one of your applications, and man, I left there and went all the way back to Wellfleet, and I was jealous and I was steamed at the town of Yarmouth because you had it and I wanted it. I was able to secure Commonwealth Community Compact grant recently for just under $70,000 for the purpose of getting more technology into Harwich, specifically to start an e-permitting. Because as we've talked about the businesses and government and COVID, leverage the technology that's out there. You know, years ago in Harwich, they said they wanted someone to be able to be in their pajamas online getting a permit. That's absolutely the way it should be, that you don't have to come into brick and mortar. So I think you folks have done a great job of utilizing technology. Don't stop. For me, I'm trying to catch up to where you folks are, but I was fortunate to at least get a funding source and to get something in the next few months. It's absolutely critical. Use that tool or those tools that are available, because that's the age that we live in.
Thank you.
Very good. Any follow-up on that? Okay, Tracy?
No, I just want to say I think we're proud. Some we're proud of. We were kind of cutting edge on pushing that online customer service thing, and customer service has been very important to us. If you could describe the most important character value in government and in you, what would that one word be?
So it was,
Your character or your core value.
One word, Joe.
there's a
One.
One word, though.
One.
Yeah.
exactly.
Not 20. One.
Just say
Integrity. Integrity.
hi. Integrity. Good. I just want
Keep
to.
going.
I have one other question.
Yes.
Thank you.
You talked about COVID and what's to come, and I think something that's been important to me is reaching to the residents that maybe are homebound, or what have you done, I guess, in Harwich to support the residents that may not, that are perhaps elderly or shut in, or with mental health issues. As you know, you talked about after we are going to have a lot of things to deal with, but the opioid issue is still going on. Have you kind of done anything through COVID to make sure that those things and those people are still getting the resources that they need?
So when I say yes, we have, I want to make it clear that the best thing that I did was get out of the way of my Council on Aging director and my Community Services director, because they knew exactly what they needed to do and wanted to do. I made sure they had the support, and I let them do it, and they've been phenomenal at that. And they have been persistent through the various iterations of the pandemic, whether it was food delivery or making sure that they could get to their medicine, medications from pharmacies and all that. The folks that do that, that's what I mean by subject matter experts. It was very little to do with me. I simply understood what they were saying and had the good sense to get out of their way and support what they were doing. And they've done phenomenal work on that. And that's a great example for me of those folks that made me aware of something that I didn't have a tie into. And they were very passionate in their advocacy, and they've been great in what they've done. And so in that instance, I just got out of the way of the experts who knew what they were doing.
Very good, thanks. We're going to go to the last question, and then I'm going to give you a chance to wrap up. I'm going to ask Dan Horgan to...
I'm actually good, thank you.
You're good? That's great. Then, Eric, do you have any final questions? Mr. Stone?
I just want, it's almost leading into your summary anyway. Joe, I don't want you to be one of these people that we interview that walk out of the door and say, gee, I wish they asked me about this, or I wish they asked me about that. So in terms of my question, is there anything that any question that you would like to raise that you wish that you had been asked, and then you can respond to it?
Thank you. What are you all looking for in an administrator? Who do you want?
It's a great question.
And I don't mean the name, I mean the type. Because I
That's
know
the-
what I bring.
So that's the
But
question
it's
you
only
want us
going
to
to work
ask you?
if I know what you want.
Okay, so you've just asked it for me, so now what's your response to that? What are the alternative roles that you might assume, depending on if we want someone who's more of a hands-on administrator? You can maybe talk about your ability to perform that role, or somebody to be more community-oriented, and
My
how you
segue
would
to
fit
my
in with that.
wrap-up? Yeah. I asked that question because that's what's going to make it work, is a full understanding of you all, of what you're looking for, and an understanding for me, in this case, of who I'd be working for. So what you get from me, as I've said to Eric and Mike, if I can use your names informally, sorry about that,
Absolutely.
way back when in the interview was, one other thing you can take from me that I say to my daughters all the time is I am humble and I am awesome. And so that's what I struggle with every day.
How old are they?
They're teenage.
Oh, so they probably don't feel that way
They
right
did
now.
roll their eyes,
They did a couple
absolutely.
years ago. You were awesome.
But the joke in that is, I mean those in the sense that I don't want to say that I'm the best thing you'll ever find, because that is impossible. But I said to the earlier subcommittee that I challenge you to find somebody that has more in-depth experience in the different levels and capacities that I have. I told you that I've been at this for 33 years. That is my entire adult life. I have been a chairman of a school committee. I have been a selectman. I have been a moderator. I have been a town clerk. But through it all, I have been a leader and a person devoted to municipal government, because that's what I'm passionate about. We have an opportunity to be in local government to help ourselves because we live here, but we get to help others who live amongst us and near us. And we get to solve problems, and we get to provide joy. And so I have dedicated my adult life to service of public, and I challenge you to find somebody that has more experience in municipal government, more experience serving as a selectman, as you have, and someone that is willing to put aside the ambition for the greater good of the town. Because that is what I bring, and that's what I'm proud of, and that's why I offer my credentials to you today for your consideration to be your next administrator.
Can I just ask one question? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to disrupt it, but I'm just thinking in the process. It's very well known publicly of, what's happened in Harwich, and that they've recently offered a contract to you. So with us going forward, potentially in our deliberations, how will that play forward for us? I guess I'm asking you, in your decision, will you wait for our decision before you make a decision in Harwich? Or will you be letting us know prior to us making a decision? And I know that that's putting you on the spot, but from our perspective, I think it's important for us to know what your plan is on that regard.
So
And you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but if there's anything you can give us in terms of, I mean, for me, and perhaps if this is, you have a funny look, and maybe I shouldn't be asking this question, and maybe it's not fair.
I think there's a legitimate response, if I may.
Okay.
First, you're not putting me on the spot, but if you are, that's your job and my job.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. But I do want to correct one thing.
Okay.
I want to make it clear that I have not been offered a contract by
Okay.
Harwich. They have offered to negotiate with me.
I see.
And I want to make that clear because Eric asked a great question back in the first interview round, and it's what I've based everything on. So I was asked what's going to prevent me from leveraging this opportunity against the town of Harwich to get a boatload of money in a longer contract. I first said that I'm the administrator. We don't have a boatload of money for anybody. But truly what I said was if you make me part of this process as a finalist, I will commit to that process. And I will commit to that process until its completion. And so when I reached out to my selectmen last week, that's what I told them. And I know that they are desirous of having a conversation with me. I'm not ignoring them, but I've told them that I'm going to respect and honor the process that you folks have started, and I hope they understand and respect my wishes to see this process through its conclusion. So I hope that helps.
It does. Okay.
Thank you.
No, and I know you had said that in our informal conversation. I understand it better now. Okay.
If I could
thank
follow
you.
that just very briefly.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I just like to, for Joe's sake and for the sake of this board, verify that Joe did make that commitment at the initial interview process. And then when I called him up to schedule the interview, he repeated that commitment. So I just want to make that clear.
If I may, just one last point on that. I've said to everybody that I gave you my word. And I know that there are risks, but if I don't keep my word, I don't have that one word of integrity. Thank you.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for expressing an interest in the town of Yarmouth and this position. This has been a wonderful interview. I very much appreciate, on behalf of the board, your being here, and we wish you well, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you for the time. I hope I've made your decision difficult, but I know in the end you'll all be well.
Yes, you have.
Thank you.
have.
Good luck with the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank